The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course. All right, it is the final episode of the series.
Yay!
On social media tips.
And there was much rejoicing.
This is actually not the longest podcast series I've ever been a part of. There was this thing that we did in Life Report. I don't know. You probably heard of this one. Remember the Pro-Life Lies video thing? There was this pro-choice guy a long time ago made this YouTube video with, there's 50-something pro-life lies. And
this is like your buddy at the conference, like pro-life versus pro-life.
I know. This is why I keep getting confused when I try to tell that story. I keep on saying pro-life lies, and that's he was the pro-lies guy.
Why? Okay.
That's what's going on. Is I've got this video still in my head.
Right now.
So I made this spreadsheet of all the different lies and had columns for do I actually agree with this guy? Do I not agree with the guy? And there's 4 or 5. So anyway, we went through all of them, and we only had time to do 4 per episode. So I think we did 12. Or something like that. It took us a really, really long time. And there was several of them that I kept putting off because it would take me I would actually have to research and try to figure out what's in this because it's outside of my area. And it's I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
Those? That sounds kind of familiar.
Maybe.
I was on 5 or 6 episodes.
Yeah, I think I brought you on for a few of them. Maybe that sounds right. But funny. What was cool was I had contacted that YouTuber in the very beginning and said, hey, I don't know if I was getting permission. I think I was just letting him know. I was just hey, I'm a pro-life podcast person, and I thought your video was really interesting, and so we're actually going to be responding, doing commentary on all of these different things. We have more common ground than you probably think, but some things I think you're wrong about, and if you're interested, here's how you can find us. And he responded, was pretty cool. He was oh, thanks, that's pretty cool, I got kind of thing. And then it was, I think it was a year later or something, a year and a half later before we finally finished the series, because we weren't doing them back-to-back, thank God. And so finally, because we would have lost all of our listeners by the end of it. But when we were done, I sent him another message, and it was hey, we finished the series, and here's all the links and everything. And he had listened to them.
Wow.
He really appreciated that we had done that. So there's at least one guy who heard what we had to say. So anyway, that was the longest series that I have ever done, and longest podcast series I will ever do. We're not doing any more 12-part podcast series.
Maybe I'll come up with something. We'll see.
So we have 7 final tips on this. Tim kind of called this practical argumentation. So final tips for doing good dialogue on social media. Take it away.
So the first one, or number 29 on our list of 34 total, or 35 total, this is from Josh, is use links sparingly. If your argument only works if they read a long article you link to, you're doing it wrong. Summarize the thesis of what you're linking to, and the link is to back you up or give them more info if they want it. I really, really like that. It's very practical and specific. It's the kind of thing that would be easy to get wrong if you're kind of a novice at arguing online. It's oh, well, so-and-so, my favorite political commentator, David French, already defeated your argument. It's here, just read this.
I've done that before.
Yeah, I think
it is a very easy mistake to make.
It's lazy. It feels very easy. Mm-hmm. But think about it when the other person does it to you. It's no, I'm not going to watch your 15-minute video. Yeah. I have someone in my life who regularly is well, watch this 15-minute video. No, I won't. I won't do it. and he's really stubborn about this. And I put my foot down and I won't do it. And so given that, don't do it to other people either.
Yeah. So to defend the pro-lifers who are doing this for a not lazy reason, I think there's a better reason why I've done this before.
Being charitable. This is good.
So David French is so good that it's I'm not going to be able to summarize this argument in a way that's going to be more persuasive than David French, the way he writes. And so either I'm not going to copy and paste this whole article because that just feels really disrespectful. I'd rather give the guy a website hit and a chance that maybe they'll subscribe to him. And so I would be look, the best response to your thing is right here. Here's the link. I mean, super helpful. Here's the link. You just have to click the button and then
summarize the argument.
Yeah,
say here's why it's good. Here's what he's doing right. Even if it takes you a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
You're not plagiarizing. You're saying I'm summarizing. This is what he's doing, and you give the link if you want to learn more. That's way better. Yep. So this is a good practical point. Monica Snyder added, don't cite a huge source and expect them to dig through it to find your point. Quote the relevant portion. This would be helpful, Josh. Quote the relevant portion of the David French article.
I agree now. I'm reformed.
I know. Or let them know where it is. She says, I think it's nice to cite your sources before the other side even asks, but some people think it's overwhelming, so maybe it depends. I think
so that's kind of an interesting thing. Is the thought is maybe is it a judgment call to actually cite your source and have a link to your source, because it might come across as like, it's like we were talking in the last episode, like as soon as you name a philosopher, there's a little bit of a thing going on, or at least it can feel like a power play to the other person, and so that's an interesting thought. Now I don't even know what to do with that.
I think like it depends on the person you're talking to, right? If you actually think they're likely to read the article, then it's helpful to cite it. And also, if they do the same thing to you, are you actually going to watch their video? Are you going to read the article that they're citing? Because if you don't want to like spend the time going through all the stuff that they want you to go through, then it's unfair to ask them to do the same.
I'm a billion times more likely to click on their link if it's to an article than if it's to a video, because a video I can't skim through. I can't like read quickly and look for the relevant portions or do like a spot check on how are they doing on their bias and that kind of thing. And so if it's an article, I think it's like much more likely that I'm going to say go ahead and post a link to it.
There's also like I think I would be more likely to post a link if I'm citing like a scientific fact than if I'm maybe making an argument that David French has done really well. Like there's a cool thing where it's like, okay, David French did this awesome thing, and here, I'm just kind of summarizing it here. But like certainly, like, you know, if I'm dealing with a person online who's like, no, seriously, I've heard scientists say that we don't know when biological life begins. Like I'm totally pointing to I don't want to completely overwhelm them in a data dump, but I am absolutely linking to scientific things.
It's the only thing you can do.
Yeah. So maybe the science versus philosophy is going to be sometimes where people will come down on one versus the other.
Maybe.
Yeah, and we want the sources we're citing to be ones which are going to be most persuasive. Joshua Baldwin and Monica Snyder say that you should always cite neutral websites for sources.
Yep.
If you're doing something that's way too pro-life, like National Right to Life or Life News or something.
What? National Right to Life is too pro-life? How can you be too pro-life? All right, so explain what you meant.
The bias is in the name.
It's just not going to register with them. You know, it's almost like you're trying to bring your friends into the conversation instead of like, here's something neutral that we already have common ground with. And same thing, if they're using Planned Parenthood or some other really obvious pro-choice resource, you don't have to accept everything they're saying as some sort of truth doctrine. When you're citing things like Josh was saying, the scientific stuff, you're going to go to a source which is not really in the debate.
So one place that you can go if you're wanting to look for sources on the embryology stuff, we actually have a resource on our website. And so don't send people to this webpage because it's on the pro-life website. But I've got links to places if you're wanting to look for those things. We created a webpage back when we first made our outreach brochure because we wanted to be able to tell people that every single fact on the brochure is cited somewhere where they can look at them with a smartphone. And our blog is an optimized for smartphones theme. So we can create a page on the blog and it just looks really good on mobile. And so if you go to equalrightsinstitute.com/sources, you're going to see an entire webpage of all the different facts and what we're citing for all those facts that are in our brochure. And a lot of those are fetal development. And so we've got links, for example, to like, I think about Amazon links for every embryology book that we're quoting from. Because my thing was like, look, if you don't believe that these things are in the book, you can go buy the book yourself. If you really don't believe me, it's in there. If that's, you can go to your library and look for it too, but there's also links to some other, like, I think like medical journal articles and things on there. We've also got sources for all of our pictures, but that's not going to be as helpful to you if you don't use our brochure.
Yeah.
So the next tip on here, this is another one from Joshua Baldwin. That guy was really active when I posted this Facebook thing. I think he might win, like either him or Nadia, I think, have maybe the most tips on here. But
Monica has a lot too.
Monica does have a lot. So yeah, anyway.
Maybe we should count them up and see who wins a
Who's
prize.
the winner? Yeah. I don't really feel like doing that. Because then there's also like, do I win if I actually have the most on? You're like, oh, whatever.
Nope. It has to be a non-ERI
It's got to be a non-ERI person.
Suspense for this tip is building. What is the tip?
Feel free. Joshua Baldwin says, no logical fallacies and cognitive biases. so you can recognize and respond to them and not obviously commit them yourself. I think this is really good. We've got articles on here that I think I've even linked to maybe in this series, but I'll link to a couple of blog posts that I know I wrote a few on logical fallacies. There's another one from Tim that we've linked to a few times that also might be relevant here. Obviously, you don't want to be committing logical fallacies, but you also don't want to be naming them all the time. So this is one of those tips that, like, I had written in this article, like, when I first started blogging, like, before ERI was a thing, and I was not expecting it to be a big thing, and it became, and, like, consistently has been one of the most, like, read pieces on the blog. And so because it was so popular, it became like, if you've heard me do a speech, you've probably heard me, like, mention, like, briefly, don't name logical fallacies, don't be that guy, don't be the guy that's using Latin, you know. So definitely, I think that's important. But now we know, like, really, in the end, if you want to be able to do this, all you got to do is listen to the Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality podcast.
It's all about cognitive biases.
You can hear all about this.
I like this point too, because obviously there's a side of it where it's important to not name these things when you don't need to, but it is also good to know them.
Yes.
I remember studying logic. I've studied logic a couple of times in my life, one in high school and one in college. And when I studied in high school, I remember just like, it was like my brain was opening up and I was seeing connections and I was just thinking through things more clearly. And I remember again, my first semester in college, I was in this 3-day week, 7:30 in the morning, intro to logic class. Just horrible,
the worst.
Horrible time.
Who scheduled that class?
I don't know, but it was a great class. And by the end of that class, again, just like my mind was open and I was thinking more clearly. And it's a weird thing that I don't even know how to explain to anybody that hasn't studied logic why this works, but it really, really works. So if you haven't studied logic before, really highly recommend that. If in general you're interested in, like, you want to study philosophy a little bit at just like a little bit of a higher level than Wikipedia pages, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online is phenomenal. Yep. Really, really good resource.
And then Monica Snyder had another one. This is really important. Stay factual. If she said, if you're not sure, admit it. Use disclaimers like, it's my understanding that, instead of asserting ideas or facts that you're not sure about. Ignore entirely any personal attacks and refocus on the substance of the debate. Remember, you are representing your side to a lot of anonymous silent observers. They're just as, or sometimes even more important than the individual you're actually debating with. And she ends with this, and I think we should really keep this in mind. She said, I've changed a lot of my views based on reading other people's debates.
I think one of the nice things about this point is I think what Monica is doing is she's encouraging us to not, like, overreach.
Yeah.
And there's a very natural inclination in the heat of an argument to kind of overreach. Like, it is just an absolute fact that such and such my position. Well, the problem is, like, it's complicated sometimes. So, like, gun control is a big thing right now.
Yeah.
And so people are throwing different studies around. And you can interpret some of these studies in different ways.
Right.
And they interact in weird ways sometimes. And so it's not just a, like, 100% fact. The fact that this study says so-and-so means X policy on gun control is the right decision. And I think there's a similar dynamic going on here where, like, you don't want to overstate more than what you know. Partially because it's not honest, and honesty is good, principled reason, but also pragmatic reason.
Yeah.
When you overreach and then you're called out on it,
It's so
you've lost.
It's over.
You've lost the entire argument for the people that are watching. Like, you've gotten your hand caught in the cookie jar. So you've got to be above reproach.
This is, who was the person in the presidential debate where it's like, he was about to name the 5 different,
Rick Perry.
Rick Perry. You don't want to have
former governor of Texas.
You don't want to have a Rick Perry moment.
There's 3. So there's 3 like federal departments or something that he was going to abolish.
He was wanting to abolish them,
and he
right?
couldn't remember the third one. He's like, we're going to do this one and this one and oops.
And, like, no one.
End of his campaign.
Yeah, it was over. So you don't want to have a Rick Perry moment on Facebook.
There's another thing that she says here that I actually maybe disagree with. It's at least worth talking about. Monica says, ignore entirely any personal attacks and refocus on the substance of the debate. Yeah. I don't think I agree with that. And this might be just style, so maybe it's not that I disagree with Monica exactly, but that it's not something that I find to be what I want to do. When there's a personal attack, I'm inclined to point it out directly and say, not cool, bro. Like, that's like, don't do that. point out the personal attack and make some kind of a comment, like be gracious. This is kind of in the, again, the don't be too nice territory. It's easy for us if we want to be good at dialogue to kind of just take hits when we don't need to take hits. Calling people to a higher standard of dialogue is, I think, the right move in a lot of situations.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be judgment call territory because, so I was just telling Tim and Rachel when we were off mic that I just recently binge watched like 3 or 4 hours of Jordan Peterson videos.
It's easy to do. Surprisingly easy to do.
And there's a reason for that, and it's a story that we're going to tell in a future podcast. But I emotionally needed to watch a lot of Jordan Peterson that day after this kind of bad experience at doing this talk at a high school. And once again, we'll get into it. But I was watching because I was like, I want to study what does this guy do when he's dealing with kind of hostile people, and that was one of the things I was kind of trying to pay attention to. Is like, how often is he calling them out for bad behavior, and how often is he just kind of responding to the like implicit, like more substantive argument? And he does some of both. But like one of the things I noticed, like I think one of the most famous, like one of the videos that kind of got him on the map was him. He was outside. He's dealing with this huge throng of activists who are very upset with him. There's a few that are on his side. This one guy even kind of like keeps on jumping in and be like, "I'm black and I agree with you," like that kind of thing. It's kind of like, dude, awkward. But he's dealing with some really kind of vicious people, and like he's responding to their arguments for quite a while, and then eventually he's like, "You are so caustic. You are so hard to listen to, like the way that you talk." And he kind of like eventually does, but he doesn't like right away. And I wonder, like sometimes that's the call is like, you know, let them have a few and just respond to the thing because you're maybe getting more done, at least for the people listening. But then at some point, call people out, or maybe that's just like the right judgment call for Jordan Peterson and not you. I don't know.
Could be. It's also, I mean, the social media dynamic is pretty important. I think I'm more likely to just let it slide in person than I am online.
Interesting. So why?
Because I think in person, it breaks the flow more. Like there's an organic flow to conversation in person. And it's just different online. I'm not sure I know how to explain why. But in a situation online, it's like every comment gets a different kind of focus, where when people are in person, they're kind of externally processing and they're going all over the place. And so like the fact that they made kind of a verbal swipe at you,
it feels more intentional if they did it in social media.
It feels more intentional. And also, if they made kind of a passive aggressive swipe at you, you know, in the middle of a long rant and you call them out on it, they might not remember that they did it. Or they might be like, "Oh no, you're taking that out of context." And then you're going to have an argument about this thing that you can't access because you don't have the conversation recorded.
Right. You don't have
this. You can point back at it and say, "This is what you said. That's not cool. Like, I'm being nice. Can we have a nice discussion?" Right. And I think, having said that, I think part of it is my personal situation is what I can handle emotionally on Facebook is minimal in terms of people being obnoxious. And so if people start being obnoxious, I'll be like, all right, are we going to do this? Are we going to have a nice conversation? And if they don't want to have a nice conversation, I'm out. So some of that I think is just what's right for me.
What I do agree with what Monica's saying here is like you're trying to refocus the debate on the substance, and you are addressing personal attacks if it's distracting from that, which oftentimes it is. So I think in some ways it just depends on your style of when do you think it's going to help refocus the debate, and when do you think calling out that personal attack is going to like swipe everything that you're trying to work on, and then you're caught up in this, "I didn't say that, you're taking it out of context." Like that's so annoying. And oftentimes it can ruin everything.
And just to be clear, like we're not relativists here.
Right.
But I think for someone like me who's like can only handle so much emotionally, I think it is like usually objectively just like the right call in the social media environment. Just call it out, like keep my conversations clean of that kind of stuff. But for someone like Monica or someone like you, it could be like your tolerance is higher, or your just strategy is different, your style is different. And that the best thing for that style is just to take those hits. Like we were talking about chess earlier. Like if what you're doing in chess is you're just really, really focused on material and like getting a material advantage, and then leveraging that material advantage later on, then okay, well you shouldn't do this such and such sacrifice. But if you have a game plan in mind and okay, by doing this sacrifice you're going to position yourself better, that is the right call. But it depends on what your strategy is. All right, 3 left. Number 33 is Monica again. She says, "Never claim research or studies have shown anything unless you are prepared to cite those sources. Don't let other people make you do the runaround to find their research for them. If they make a claim like that, politely ask for their sources more than once if necessary.
I think there's a good thing that can happen, like on the side when you ask someone for their sources. If they make some huge claim, so I'm going to compare it to the gun control debate going on right now. And I'm not like trying to imply like the gun control debate shouldn't be happening right now. Like there was this awful school shooting, like yeah, fine, let's talk about it. But like, for example, there's one like factoid that's been thrown around a lot of what I think 29 mass shootings in the last, I forget
school shootings in the last like
school shootings
year or something.
Yeah, and it's like that sounds crazy. If someone said that to me, I hope that I would ask them for their source, because if you go and start looking into it, you find out actually it's really been like I think it's like more like 2, like
so a lot
legit
of suicides. It really like a BB gun shot at a school. I mean, it's like really. Yeah. It's not that number.
So someone had a gun in a parking lot, like it's different. Right. It's just like kind of like what should get counted. Clearly, I think clearly it shouldn't be the number is not 29, but it could be that someone's just heard that thing and they're quoting it to you, and then you ask them, like, "Do you have a source for that?" And they might go Google it and then start reading and be like, "Oh, I'm not sure." And like maybe they can walk it back on their own without you having to really pound it down. Like it's kind of like that thing in the third biology lesson. It's kind of like this might be the nicest way to help them to save face, because they just said something that's like really wrong or really incorrect, and let them kind of walk it back, but kind of maybe make them do that work instead of you going and be like, "I've already heard about the 29 facts. Here's a bunch of sources to how stupid that factoid is. Like it's totally wrong." Like make them do the work.
The other thing is, I think depending on how you ask for the source, it's going to allow them to either walk it back and save face, or feel really defensive, even sometimes enough for them to like feel embarrassed, want to leave the conversation. So I think, if you're saying something like, "You need a source to back up that claim," it sounds outrageous and unbelievable.
Right.
That is really hard to come back from when they go do the research. They're trying to find their source because maybe they didn't have it originally or something.
Because you've used the word outrageous now, which implies that unless we're correct, then they're being outrageous, and that makes it hard.
But if you say something like, "That sounds really like a high number to me. Could you show me a source so I can learn more about this?"
Right.
Because I'm interested in getting to the truth of the matter.
Right.
I think the numbers here in this case, in this type of environment, they really matter.
Yeah.
And so same thing in the abortion discussion. Sometimes the numbers really do matter. Maybe something like women who died from illegal abortion before it was passed by Roe v. Wade. Like, talking about the numbers there could really matter to this pro-choice person, and maybe they've heard numbers that are totally wrong.
Right. Like, and it also gives you a chance to speak some open-mindedness. Like be like, "Look, I think the facts matter. I want to believe facts. I don't want to believe fake news. Whatever. Like I want to. So like that sounds really high to me, but I'm open. Can you find me something that I could use to educate myself if that's actually true?" You have an opportunity here to speak a little bit of open-mindedness into the conversation, and hopefully that will also help. Like the tone of the conversation is one where like it's okay if they were wrong, because we're open-minded. That means it's okay for us to be wrong sometimes, and maybe they will also end up a little bit more open-minded as a result.
I think this might be one of my favorite moments in our podcast in a few episodes. Like this is a really important point, Rachel. And I want to try to explain why it's like connecting to me so deeply.
Okay.
So I recently finished this book that you actually told me about, Josh, called Creativity Incorporated, which is about one of the founders of Pixar. He's telling kind of the story of Pixar.
It's a fantastic book.
Really, really excellent. Very, very interesting. And Pixar is an interesting organization, and their kind of management style is a little bit different than a lot of other companies. And part of the reason why they did what they did was it was so important for them to encourage creativity. Yeah. And so like now we've got Rachel here. Now we have a philosophy team, and it's like very, very firmly in my mind, how can we structure ERI in such a way that we're encouraging creativity? Yep. And we've even made some calls in the last couple of weeks that had everything to do with, well, we should do it this way because that encourages creativity. Yeah. That encourages our team to work together and to try to get help together, and managing people getting credit for ideas, and managing people feeling comfortable, not feeling stupid if they have a bad idea, all of those kinds of things. Yep. to encourage people to want to work together. And so I'm kind of like, I'm thinking about that as like, okay, we want the environment to be one that's conducive and encouraging to people being creative. And I feel like your suggestion here of thinking through presenting kind of the challenge and asking them for their sources in a way that's really gracious, it creates an environment for them to be open-minded.
Yeah.
It's conducive to the environment and the conversation being, even if it doesn't happen till later, it's just the kind of environment that's well suited to them being willing to back off and like not feel too bad. Like if they're going to back off at some level, like they're going to be afraid of losing some face.
Yeah.
And the more that we can do to make that environment one that's well suited to them doing that, without feeling like they're going to get just completely clobbered, the more likely they're going to do it. It's really, really good. And something we should talk about more.
There's a pro-life statistic that I've heard a lot in pro-life circles, kind of just growing up and, doing all the activism things that I've been doing. And I was recently doing research on that statistic because I was writing about that topic. And I found out that the background, actual information behind that statistic is really bad. And so I'm thinking about this point and I'm thinking, and I haven't used that statistic before in persuasive dialogue, but what if I had, and then they're like, okay, where is that coming from? And I try to look for it. How would I want them to treat me when I come back and say, dang, I'm really glad you asked about that because it's so bad. Like I've learned, through college, I was like a neuroscience major and we did a lot of scientific research and kind of determining how to look at statistics when they're reliable and look at who's funding the study and all of that sort of analysis. And so when I'm looking at this stuff, I know what to look for. And when I come back to that conversation to my pro-choice friend, how would I want them to treat me? Yeah. I would want them to say something like, it's okay that statistic isn't real or isn't, reliable. Yeah. Let's work with that. Let's look at what actually is going on.
Right.
We've talked a lot recently, like in the last year or two, about people needing to feel emotionally safe to change their minds. Yeah. And I feel like it's similar, but there's a distinction here, and I want to find out what it is. Like I haven't quite put the pieces together. It's not as much them feeling emotionally safe. It's more like feeling mentally safe or something. Like
it's like a learning environment.
Is it just the same thing? I feel like there's a difference here.
I think there is a difference.
Help me identify what the difference is.
I think the difference is
definitely related.
Emotionally safe is I'm not going to yell at you in this conversation if you disagree with me. Where kind of like this learning is good, like intellectually safe or something is like I'm not going to call you stupid if you are trying to learn with me and discover the truth. Like if in discovering the truth you found out that your argument was bad or your sources were bad or something, doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're like learning, and that's good. Like kind of the there are no bad questions thing, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think there are some bad questions.
Of course there are bad questions. It's a stupid statement. There are bad
that,
questions and bad statements, and that's one of them.
But like there's an attitude where it's like because we're playing on the same team, you can totally get a mulligan. Like it's okay. Mistakes happen to the best of us. I would rather you be comfortable kind of backing off on that claim and let's move to the one that works and just be able to keep talking. Now we've got the chance for an even better conversation than it being like they feel like they just lost the debate because they ended up accidentally using this statistic that they didn't do enough research on. Like you're trying to, it's like creating an emotionally safe environment because you're trying to keep it, make it so everyone is feeling open-minded.
Like I think like something in that direction, but I don't feel like it's exactly right either. Because the way that we've talked about being emotionally safe is more, it's more all encompassing than just like feeling than their feelings. And we've talked a lot about it like in the context of people are more likely to change their minds if they feel emotionally safe. So maybe I've got like another stab at what it is. Maybe like I really want to figure this out because like there's something here, something like. If they admit that their citation wasn't good, that doesn't mean they're changing their mind about the issue, but like they're willing to yield a given point in a way that's going to be productive for the dialogue, as opposed to either them not yielding the point because they're being stubborn or just leaving because they're embarrassed or something like that. That's going to like shut the conversation down. Right. It's like it's an environment where the conversation isn't going to be shut down. Like it's like kind of safe room for mistakes to happen or something. I'm not sure.
Like you're recognizing that intellectual honesty is a virtue or something like that. And
like rewarding intellectual virtue
exactly.
instead of punishing them for it.
You're rewarding it.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to change their mind. Now, when they do change their mind, I want them to feel like they're winning, not like they've lost the debate, right? Yeah. And we've kind of talked about that sort of language before. Yeah. I think this is similar where they feel like they are being rewarded for being intellectually honest and we're getting somewhere rather than you have to be obstinate. Otherwise, I'm not going to respect you. Like that just doesn't make sense at all.
It goes back to there's some, I can't remember I never remember his name. It's bad, but there's this really good TED Talk, and I'll link to it in the show notes, where like his entire thesis was if argument equals war, then learning equals losing. Mm-hmm. And he's like, okay, as soon as learning equals losing, then you're setting up the wrong playing field. Like, so then that means that arguments should not feel like war. Arguments should feel like something else because you want learning to equal winning. And if you can help the person feel like, hey, awesome, whenever anyone learns something, like the way I've been describing this in my speeches in Canada, in Canada last week was like, the ideal is that every time people are talking to each other, that they leave and cumulatively everyone believes more true things and fewer false things. It doesn't mean every single person's changed their mind on things, but ideally people have learned things in this experience and we're leaving better off for it.
All right, number 34 is from Rachel. She says, not drowning them in text is a good goal to strive for unless you are telling a story for something like a thought experiment. Like being minimal on the word count here.
No walls of text.
Yeah.
They're more likely to actually read everything you are saying this way if they're drowning you in text with many trains of thought running everywhere. Perhaps remark that they are saying a lot at once and ask them which they would like a response to first. That's a move that I make in personal life. People give like 5 arguments, like, great, pick one. I think this is one of those areas where you're kind of on the horns of a dilemma. Like finding the balance here is just really hard. Yep. So like I certainly agree with the point. Yeah. But on one hand, you don't want to be too concise because the structure of Facebook makes it really easy for people to like lose track of what the purpose of what you're saying is, like what you're responding to. And on the other hand, people are going to skim and they're going to like move really, really quickly online. And so you have to be as concise as you can be. And I think that's a good reason to like narrow, like we're just responding to like a specific point at a time to try to avoid that problem.
In previous episodes, we've talked about text as almost like a currency, and you're going to spend it where it really matters and where you can be concise, because you only want to once in a while send a long paragraph. If every response and comment you're giving is a total, like, I don't even know, chapter, like, they're not going to read it.
Yeah, there's this thing, and I've been really clear about this when I've gotten into like more like in a relational apologetics context. If I'm doing an email, conversation with someone, like towards the beginning, being like, all right, let's try to limit how many things we're saying at once, because I've learned from the mistake, because I've had this happen where it's like they make 3 arguments, and so then I respond to all 3 of them fairly thoroughly, and then but I've made multiple points in that, and so then pretty soon they're responding to 6 things, and it just grows, and because then it's kind of like, well, you don't want to drop any arguments, you don't want to, like in a debate, if a dropped argument, you lose that one, like they win that one, and so then pretty soon everyone is having to write a chapter of a book because you're doing every single, all right, you made these 18 points, and so here are my thoughts on all those. And it also then takes way longer for people to respond, because every time you get an email back, it's like, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna have to,
it's overwhelming.
It's gonna be weeks before I'm able to do all the research I need to respond to. Now there's 67 points,
That's what happened with the death penalty discussion that we were having with Sean and Chrissy. Remember that?
Yeah,
years ago.
I mean, I wasn't really engaged. I was reading you. I was reading it, but yeah.
Yeah,
you were debating.
We had this great email exchange, and like it was productive, but it just got to a point where, in order to respond, you got to respond to like 17 things that all require like 2 paragraphs. Yeah. Too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's too much. So towards the beginning,
Sorry,
being like,
Sean
look, because it's just like I don't want to, like I'm always saying like all these things are important. Like, it's not like you need to pick just like your top 2 things and throw everything else out. I'm just saying we're going to do this slowly, so that, because I don't want you feeling like you don't want me to respond to 17 different arguments in a thing, because then you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to trust me. Like this is like, we can all agree that's not the outcome that we want. So how can we make the outcome we want? Let's just try to keep this to, 2 or 3 paragraphs or less per email if we can, or, like 5, something like that. Like not a super long email, and kind of focusing on 1 or 2 points at a time and just going back and forth. And then when we're ready to move on, then we say, okay, yeah, I'm good to move on. What about this? And then kind of do it like that. And then it's just a lot more controllable. Conversations are like viruses. You just got to keep them controlled in the beginning before it spreads.
I would say organized. You want to keep thoughts organized.
So it's more positive descriptor than viruses.
I like viruses. They're like viruses.
All right.
I'm pessimistic about social media dialogue, so I'm going to go with viruses too. 2 to 1.
Pathogen. These social media pathogen debates.
Because I'm a woman.
Oh,
wow.
It's
Out
taken
of nowhere.
You know what?
The woman card.
I'm impressed Rachel's taken this long to pull the woman card on this podcast.
You don't get to snap yourself. That's so lame.
She might be snapping me. How do you know?
It's not lame. I'm going to give myself a high five now.
Anyway.
All right. Okay, so that leaves us to our last tip for the entire thing, and this is Monica Snyder. I think Monica might actually win this thing if we actually counted up the points, so it don't matter. If someone crosses you under a wall of ranty text and you want to engage, feel free to pick one singular point and respond with only a line or two asking about it. There is no rule saying you have to reply to every single point they make all at once, and I think that's really good. So like, we just talked about like, here's kind of how I do this in email threads. It's a little bit harder to try to negotiate an agreement in a public Facebook wall. Like it's just like the entire feeling of the, quote unquote conversation, probably more like debate, is just different.
It feels more like you're in the Coliseum.
Yeah. Everyone's watching, everyone's engaged. I think it is fine if they do this whole wall of text to be like, all right, those were a whole lot of things you just said. I could respond to all of them, but why don't we do these one at a time? Do you want to pick or do you want me to pick? Because like the thing that I think was, I thought actually your 4th point was the best. Like there's a different thing, you can be like, look, I'm happy to respond to any of this, or you might just pick one and just say, I'm just going to respond to one of those because I don't want to make you read a wall of text and just respond fairly briefly. You don't have to match them. If anything, people are going to be more likely to read your comments if you're more concise than they are to read the other person's wall of text.
I'm going to give a slight pushback. I feel like if you're in a very passive, like you're an onlooker on a conversation, and if in general, I'm seeing person A has like fairly long responses and person B is only doing like short sentences in responses, and like that's consistently an issue. I think the way that I like interpret that is probably person A is the person that's winning the argument. And person B doesn't know what person B is talking about.
If you're not if you're not reading either of them, you're just looking.
And I'm just kind of like really skimming. I think there might be some kind of like emotional effect of here's a lot of text here that can be kind of like overwhelming and like indicative of I know what I'm talking about, and so I'm lecturing like they have kind of the professor role or something. I'm not sure.
So I think I might at least probably partially agree with you, because certainly that's a thing that happens on Reddit, is because those threads will get so long that a lot of times the ones that are getting the most upvoted are the ones that are just like really long. It looks really like thorough or something like that. I definitely would say like, don't respond to a big wall of text with a short sentence. Like that's like crazy. But I don't think that you should necessarily try to match them unless like that's the only point. Like what like it could be that you match them once and be like, all right, you want to do the wall of text thing? All right, I'll match your wall of text, and then at the end say, hey, this was really long. You want to go to like we're just doing one at a time, like, and keep these more manageable. I mean, Facebook has a character limit, so then you're having to reply to yourself because you're past 5,000 words or whatever it is. Like, at some point. So I think it's fair to at least consider how is this going to look to other people. But I think in the end, just whoever's comment is getting more likes is going to psychologically affect people more than just who's got the greater word count.
That's so not fair. Such a problem.
Yep.
So if you haven't listened to like part 1 in a while, we're still pessimistic about dialogue online, and we still think it's a lot better in person. Aim for in-person dialogue if possible. But if you're going to do it online, pay attention to these tips and you'll at least do a lot better.